What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with this mega comparison of these 6 Motorola G series phones. Now, very recently, in January of 2021, Motorola released these 3 devices: the Moto G Play 2021, the Moto G Power 2021, and the Moto G Stylus 2021. And then last year, they launched the Moto G Fast 2020, the Moto G Power 2020, and then finally, the Moto G Stylus 2020. So technically, these 3 phones are the successors to these 3 phones. Now, based off the time that you're watching this video, I'm not sure exactly what pricing and availability will be for these various devices. It is quite possible, too, that they are going to be discontinuing the 2020 Motorola G series phones coming up very shortly, but I don't exactly know for sure. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, all 6 of these phones are the US models. Now, there are some other Motorola G series phones that have been launched internationally, such as the Moto G9 Plus and Moto G9 Power, for example, and I have already covered those phones here on the channel. But for the sake of this video, we're just comparing these 6 phones that have launched in the US in the last year. Another interesting thing too is that obviously the Moto G Fast 2020 was replaced by the Moto G Play 2021. I'm not sure why they decided to switch from G Fast to G Play, but I'm pretty sure that we won't be seeing a 2021 Moto G Fast. Obviously, anything's possible, but it seems like they've decided to go with G Play instead. Now, in addition to this, we have done individual comparisons between each of these 3 phones and their various successors here in the channel. Those videos definitely do go into a lot more detail than this video is going to, obviously, since we have way more phones here to cover. So this video is meant to give you more of a general overview of all 6 of these phones, whereas if you want to watch the individual comparisons, you probably will learn a lot more. Now, if you do own one of these 3 Moto G series devices from last year, then you might be considering already to upgrade to one of the 2021 models. So it is possible, for example, that you might go from the Moto G Power 2020 to the Moto G Stylus 2021, or maybe you're going from the Moto G Fast 2020 to the Moto G Power 2021, or maybe you're completely new to all of these phones and you're trying to decide out of these 6 which one is the best for you. Obviously, everyone has different situations that they're in when deciding whether they want to upgrade or to get a second device or an additional phone. So again, I kind of want to give you some brief information about each device as part of this comparison. Now, the first thing I want to discuss are the various display sizes. Now, every single 2021 Moto G series phone is larger in display size compared to the devices from last year. So for example, with the Moto G Play, we're getting a 6.5-inch display. With the Moto G Power, we're getting a 6.6-inch display. And then with the Moto G Stylus, we're getting a 6.8-inch display. Compared to the 3 Moto G series devices from last year that all have 6.4-inch displays. So if you are looking for a phone with a larger display, obviously the Moto G Stylus 2021 is going to have the biggest display of all of them, but with any of these 3 phones, you will be getting a larger display. Another difference too is the aspect ratio. So if you're not aware what the aspect ratio is, that is the ratio of width to height. And with the 3 Motorola G series phones that launched in 2021, all of these devices do feature 20:9 aspect ratio displays. So with that, you're getting a more narrow form factor, but also a taller height. And really, there's 2 advantages with that. The first advantage is that the phone is going to be a bit easier to hold in the hand because it is more narrow. But the second advantage too is that in general, you're going to be getting a larger display that is very well optimized for the ways that we use our phones nowadays. If you're like me, you probably do a lot of scrolling on your device, whether that's on social media apps or just going on a web page. And if you're doing that, then having a more narrow but taller display allows you to fit more of your feed into a single frame, which means that you're going to be doing a lot less scrolling. So I definitely prefer that. Obviously, for watching video content, most of it nowadays is still in 16:9, including my own videos, but you can also crop in for a more immersive video viewing experience. So in general, I would say when it comes to the displays, with the 3 new Motorola G series phones from this year, all 3 of them offer at least some sort of upgrade. You could argue that with the Moto G Play, we have a water drop notch at the top, which is kind of a step back compared to the Moto G Fast, where we got a hole punch for the front-facing camera. I do prefer that hole punch form factor, just like what we're getting with all the other various Motorola G series devices, but for some reason with the Moto G Play 2021, they decided to give it a water drop notch. Now as far as screen to body ratios go, that is basically the ratio of the front panel, that's the display, versus the bezel area. Basically, with the Moto G Play 2021, we're getting a screen to body ratio of 80.6% compared to 83.8%, compared to 84.8%, compared to 82.0%, compared to 83.0%, compared to 83.7%. So out of these 6 phones, the Moto G Stylus 2021 does indeed have the best screen to body ratio. Now that is pretty interesting considering that the bottom panel here is still a little bit on the thicker side, but due to the larger display in this phone, we are getting the best screen to body ratio out of all these various options. Now with the 3 phones from last year, we have a 19.5:9 aspect ratio with the Moto G Fast, a 19:9 aspect ratio with the Moto G Power 2020, and then a 19:9 aspect ratio with the Moto G Stylus 2020. So I definitely prefer the screen to body ratios of these 3 newer devices. Now when it comes to front-facing cameras, there are quite a few differences with each of these phones. With the Moto G Play 2021, we're getting a 5 megapixel front-facing camera, compared to the Moto G Power 2021, where we're getting an 8 megapixel front-facing camera, compared to the Moto G Stylus 2021, where we're getting a 16 megapixel front-facing camera, compared to the Moto G Fast 2020, where we're getting an 8 megapixel front-facing camera, compared to the Moto G Power 2020, where we're getting a 16 megapixel front-facing camera, and then finally compared to the Moto G Stylus, where we are getting a 16 megapixel front-facing camera. So basically we're getting 16 there, and 16 here, and then we're getting 8, and then 5. So definitely something to keep in mind when it comes to the front-facing camera. Now as far as storage goes, one interesting thing about the Moto G Power 2021 is that this phone does come in 2 different variants. There is a 32 gigabyte variant and then also a 64 gigabyte variant. Now the 32 gigabyte variant features 3 gigabytes of RAM, while the 64 gigabyte variant has 4 gigabytes of RAM. So something to keep in mind there. But with the Moto G Play 2021, we're getting 32 gigs. Again, with this phone, we're getting either 32 or 64. 128 right here. We're getting 32 gigs right here. We're getting 64 gigs right here. So it's kind of interesting how last year there was only one variant of the Moto G Power, and it did give us 64 gigs. And then the Moto G Stylus from last year does also feature 128 gigabytes compared to this year's model. So not too many major differences when it comes to internal storage, and then all 6 of these phones do support microSD card expansion. Now none of these phones have wireless charging, which is a bit unfortunate, but they do all feature fingerprint sensors. However, there are some pretty big differences when it comes to the fingerprint sensors based on where they're located. Now with the Moto G Play, the fingerprint sensor is on the back side of the phone, and it does work very well. In fact, it works very well with all of these phones. And then with the 3 Motorola G series phones from last year, they all have rear-mounted fingerprint sensors as well. But the biggest difference when it comes to fingerprint sensors is that the Moto G Power 2021 and the Moto G Stylus 2021 both feature fingerprint sensors mounted on the power button. And this is something that I actually do personally prefer. I feel like it's very convenient having the fingerprint sensor located right there. Certainly no complaints about that. And it's actually something that I'd like to see a lot more often on other devices as well. So I definitely give Motorola a big thumbs up for at least giving us side-mounted fingerprint sensors on 2 of their 3 new Motorola G series phones for the US. Now let's get to the fun part. This is the cameras. There are quite a few differences when it comes to the cameras on every single one of these phones. The first thing is that with the Motorola G Play 2021 and Motorola G Power 2021, both of these phones unfortunately do not have ultra-wide-angle cameras, whereas all 3 of the Motorola G series devices launched last year do have ultra-wide-angle cameras. So unfortunately, that's a pretty major step back when it comes to 2 out of the 3 Motorola G series devices to be launched this year. Now with the Moto G Stylus 2021, thankfully this phone does indeed have an ultra-wide-angle camera, which is really good. And another difference too with the ultra-wide camera on this device is that it actually can take photos this time, compared to the Moto G Stylus 2020, where you could actually only take videos with the ultra wide angle camera. So they have this special mode here called Action Cam, and basically with Action Cam, it uses the ultra wide angle camera as almost like a GoPro in a sense with the way it works. But unfortunately with this device, you can't take photos with that camera. Whereas with the Moto G Stylus 2021, they did get rid of the Action Cam option when it comes to taking videos with the ultra wide camera. You can take regular videos, but they're not in that Action Cam style, so keep that in mind, but at least you are able to take photos using the ultra-wide camera. So the setup here is a bit more traditional compared to how it was last year. But basically, we are getting ultra-wide angle cameras with 4 of the 6 devices here, and then the Moto G Play 2021 and Moto G Power 2021 don't have ultra-wide angle cameras. Now, all of these phones support portrait mode for both the front and rear cameras, which is definitely really good. Now, when it comes to RAM, again, with the Moto G Power 2021, we have 2 different options. You can get either 3 or 4 gigabytes of RAM. The Moto G Play 2021 does have just 3 gigs of RAM. Then with the Moto G Stylus 2021, 4 gigs of RAM, then 3, 4, and then 4. Then when it comes to the processors, we're getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 460, we're getting the Snapdragon 662, we're getting the Snapdragon 678, and then with all 3 of these phones from last year, we're getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 665. Now, I did run a benchmark test with all 6 of these phones, so let's take a look at those scores. And then keep in mind, this is the 3GB of RAM variant of the Moto G Power 2021, so the scores might be slightly lower compared to the 4GB of RAM variant. Now, you can see the scores here for yourself. I'm not going to read through each one of them, but I think one thing that is very obvious is that last year, the 3 Motorola G series devices pretty much all scored in the same range when it came to performance, whereas in 2021, there are some really big differences here. So from the G Power 2020 to the G Power 2021, there aren't really any big changes there, but you can see from the Moto G Fast to the Moto G Play, we've had a decrease in the scores. And then from the Moto G Stylus 2020 to the Moto G Stylus 2021, you can see that we do have a pretty significant increase when it comes to the scores here. So definitely this time around in 2021, the more money you pay, for the more premium phone of the 3, the better performance you're gonna get. Whereas last year, that wasn't really so much the case. Now you probably already noticed, but all 6 of these phones do run Android 10. I don't know when, if, or ever any of these phones are going to get the Android 11 update, but I certainly hope so. Another thing to remember as well is that none of these 6 phones have NFC. So if you are trying to make mobile contactless payments using that technology through services like Google Pay, for example, then you won't be able to do it with any of these devices. So that is a bit disappointing. Another big difference too is that all 3 phones from last year did support 4K video recording, whereas this time around in 2021, we only get 4K video recording with the Moto G Stylus 2021, whereas the Moto G Power 2021 and Moto G Play 2021 can only do 1080p video recording. Now when it comes to battery capacity, we're getting 5,000 milliamp hours with this phone. Unfortunately, with the Moto G Stylus 2021, we're getting 4,000 milliamp hours of battery capacity. Same thing with the Moto G Fast, 4,000 right here. Then we are getting 5,000 with the Moto G Power 2020, and then the Moto G Stylus 2020 does have 4,000 milliamp hours. So it is pretty interesting how both the Moto G Play and Moto G Power this time around do have 5,000 milliamp hours of battery capacity, just like last year's 2020 Moto G Power. Another major difference is stereo audio. So what stereo audio is that you get audio coming out of both the main speaker on the bottom, but then also audio coming out of the earpiece. So in theory, with stereo audio, you're getting a more immersive, higher quality, and louder audio listening experience. And what's awesome about the Moto G Fast, Moto G Power, and Moto G Stylus of 2020 is that all 3 of these phones featured stereo audio. Unfortunately though, with the 2021 Motorola G series phones, stereo audio has been removed. So these 3 phones technically are a downgrade when it comes to audio quality compared to these 3 phones. Now, all 6 of these devices do feature USB-C. We're also getting 3.5mm headphone jacks with all 6 of them as well, so definitely no complaints there. Now, here's the backside of all these various devices. Definitely some differences here, pretty much going from phone to phone. Now with the Moto G Play 2021, we have kind of this matte gradient back on it, kind of similar in a sense to how the Moto G Stylus 2020 looks, except with that phone, we do have a glossy back instead. Now all four of these phones do have glossy backs, as you probably have noticed already, and they do pick up some fingerprints, but with the Moto G Stylus 2021, that phone picks up the least amount of fingerprints out of these four. We also have different designs when it comes to the camera modules. Now, with the three phones from last year, they actually look pretty similar when it comes to the camera module designs, but you can see this time around in 2021, we have some similarities between the Moto G Play and Moto G Power, but then the Moto G Stylus 2021 has its own different, unique design. But in general, I think all the phones do look nice as far as the finishes on the back, but the design in the Moto G Power probably is my favorite out of these six, because I think it looks cool, but also it doesn't pick up any fingerprints. Then on the other hand, I think the Moto G Stylus 2021 probably does look the most premium out of all these devices. Now, all the backs on all these phones are all made out of plastic. Now, I know that the glossy finishes sometimes do make the phones look like they are made out of glass, but these are all indeed made out of plastic, so keep that in mind. And then finally, for the biggest difference from one generation to the next, it definitely has to be the styluses, with the Moto G Stylus 2020 featuring this design where you pretty much have to kind of dig your finger in and pry out the stylus, whereas then with the Moto G Stylus 2021, it features a pop-out, pop-in method of removing and putting back in the stylus. So this is pretty similar to how it works with the LG Stylo 6 and then also all the various Galaxy Note phones. So definitely a little bit more premium here. But as far as how the actual stylus works and the various features that come with it, I would say it's almost the same with both of these phones from my testing. I know that I had a few people tell me that the new Moto G Stylus 2021 had kind of an inferior stylus and the way it worked wasn't quite as refined. I haven't noticed that so much from my testing, but then again, on the other hand, when it comes to actual usability, I haven't exactly noticed any benefits with the Moto G Stylus 2021. The biggest difference though is that with the Moto G Stylus 2021, the stylus is a little bit longer, but that's pretty much the only difference. It's also perfectly rounded, whereas with the Moto G Stylus 2020, it's not perfectly round. But again, these are all little differences that really don't make a big difference when actually using the phones. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this comparison between all six of these Motorola G series devices. Again, these three were from 2020, and then these three were recently launched in 2021. So definitely some differences, but then also quite a few similarities. In general, I would say that minus the larger displays in the newer phones, and then a few other smaller things, the new phones are quite a disappointment. We're losing out on a lot of features with these three new devices from Motorola compared to their predecessors. And I can't think of really too many times that that's happened before, where the newer models are worse than the older models. And what's especially disappointing about that is that these three phones from Motorola that were launched in 2020 were really three of my favorite devices as far as recommending phones that offer a ton of value. So I'm really sad to see that these three newer phones appear to be a bit of a step back. Now, I'm not really sure if some of the removed features necessarily make all three of these phones unbuyable, as they are still pretty good devices in general. But again, any sort of step back in the tech industry is always a disappointment. But I'm really curious to know what you think. What do you think of the three new Motorola G series phones compared to their various 2020 counterparts? Are you happy with the changes? Are you disappointed? Or are you pretty neutral on it? I'm definitely curious to know what you think. But this is Kevin here with Moto G Play 2021 versus Moto G Power 2021 versus Moto G Stylus 2021 versus Moto G Fast 2020 versus Moto G Power 2020 versus Moto G Stylus 2020. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Also, make sure to subscribe for more content about these devices and other affordable smartphones. I hope you have a great day.